September 20th, 1942. Naval Air Station North Island, San Diego, California. Lieutenant Commander Eddie Sanders gripped the control stick, his palms damp with anticipation despite the crisp morning air rolling off the Pacific. Before him lay a machine that, by all rights, should not exist in American hands. The instrument panel displayed unfamiliar Japanese characters. The controls felt alien, and the entire cockpit carried the distinct scent of oil and materials utterly foreign. Beyond the windscreen, armed guards surrounded the hangar, their vigilant presence a testament to the precious cargo that had arrived 3 weeks earlier. This was, without exaggeration, the most valuable aircraft in the world, and Sanders was about to become the first American to fly it. He released the brakes, and the Mitsubishi A6M2 Model 21-0 fighter rolled forward, its engine purring with a surprising, almost ominous, smoothness. Within minutes, this single test flight would expose critical weaknesses, setting in motion a transformation of American fighter tactics that would ultimately shatter Japan's aerial supremacy. The secrets locked within this captured machine would help forge a weapon that would shoot down over 5,000 enemy aircraft and decisively turn the tide of the Pacific War. The twist of fate, Koga Zero in the Aleutian bog. This profound shift began not with Sanders' momentous flight, but 5 months prior, on a desolate, rain-soaked island in the Aleutians. June 4th, 1942, the very same day, 3,000 miles to the east, American dive bombers were decimating 4 Japanese aircraft carriers at the Battle of Midway, forever changing the course of the Pacific War. Yet, in the isolated, fog-bound Aleutian Islands of Alaska, a smaller, equally transformative drama was quietly unfolding. 19-year-old Flight Petty Officer First Class Tadayoshi Koga launched his Zero fighter from the carrier Ryujo as part of a diversionary strike against the American base at Dutch Harbor. The morning mission initially proceeded according to plan. Koga and his wingmen, Chief Petty Officer Makoto Endo and Petty Officer Tsuguo Shikata, attacked Dutch Harbor with devastating effect, shooting down an American PBY Catalina patrol bomber and strafing survivors in the water. The Zero performed exactly as designed, faster and more maneuverable than anything the Americans could field. Then, a single, unassuming bullet changed everything. Ground fire from Dutch Harbor, likely from a .50 caliber machine gun, struck Koga's aircraft, severing the critical oil return line. For an engine utterly dependent on precise lubrication, this was a death sentence. Oil began spraying from the damaged line, and Koga knew he had perhaps 15 precious minutes before his engine would seize completely. He radioed his flight commander about the damage and turned toward Akutan Island, 25 miles east of Dutch Harbor, designated by Japanese planners as an emergency landing site. A submarine waited offshore to rescue downed pilots. As Koga approached Akutan Island, he spotted what appeared to be a perfect emergency landing field, a long stretch of flat grassland half a mile inland from Broadbite. His wingmen circled above as Koga initiated his approach, landing gear extended for what should have been a routine wheels-down landing. Shikata, flying overhead, suddenly noticed water glistening between the grass stalks on his second pass. He realized with a jolt of horror that the field was actually a deceptive bog, the lush grass concealing knee-deep mud and standing water. He tried desperately to radio a warning, but it was too late. Koga was already irrevocably committed to his landing. The Zero's wheels gently touched the grass at approximately 80 miles per hour. For a brief, agonizing moment, the landing seemed successful. Then, with a sickening lurch, the main gear sank deep into the soft, treacherous mud beneath the vegetation, catching with tremendous, violent force. Physics, unyielding and unforgiving, took over. The lightweight fighter, its tail still traveling at landing speed, flipped completely over in a violent cartwheel. The aircraft slammed upside down into the bog with bone-crushing impact. The force snapped Koga's neck instantly, killing him before he could draw another breath. His body remained suspended by his seat belt in the inverted cockpit, his service pistol and samurai sword still strapped to his waist, his flight suit remarkably pristine except for the precise medical taping wrapped around his torso from previous injuries. Above, Koga's wingmen faced an agonizing decision. Standing orders explicitly required them to destroy any disabled Zero to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. They circled the crash site multiple times, machine guns ready, frantically searching for any sign that their comrade had survived. The aircraft appeared so remarkably intact, sitting inverted in the marsh like a helpless turtle on its back, that they could not bring themselves to fire. Perhaps Koga was alive, trapped, waiting for rescue. They could not murder their friend on the mere chance he might survive. After several more passes, their fuel running critically low, they reluctantly turned west and returned to the Ryujo. The submarine assigned to rescue downed pilots diligently searched the waters around Akutan for hours before the American destroyer USS Williamson ultimately drove it away. Koga's body and his Zero remained undisturbed in the Aleutian wilderness, 5,000 miles from Japan, awaiting secret poise to betray every vulnerability of the Empire's most feared weapon. A serendipitous discovery, a pivotal recovery. For 5 long, silent weeks, Koga's Zero sat undisturbed in the Akutan bog. The crash site lay hidden, out of sight of standard shipping lanes and aerial patrol routes, tucked away in a small valley that, through the perpetual Aleutian fog, received perhaps only 6 days of clear visibility per month. The aircraft carrier forces that might have searched for Koga had already retreated westward after the catastrophic defeat at Midway. The young pilot's fate became just another casualty statistic in a war that was rapidly turning against Japan. Then, on July 10, 1942, an American PBY Catalina patrol bomber piloted by Lieutenant William Thies became lost. Navigation in the Aleutians was notoriously treacherous, with magnetic compasses unreliable near the Arctic Circle and vital landmarks often obscured by near-constant fog. Thies had been navigating by dead reckoning when he serendipitously spotted the Shumagan Islands through a welcome break in the clouds. Recognizing his position, he corrected course for Dutch Harbor, choosing to fly directly over Akutan Island rather than around it, to save precious time and fuel. Machinist's mate Albert Knack, serving as plane captain, happened to glance down at precisely the right moment. Through a temporary gap in the swirling fog, he spotted an unusual shape in the marsh below, something that simply did not belong in the desolate Aleutian landscape. The bright red circles on the wings were unmistakable. Thies circled the site several times, meticulously noting the position on his charts. The Zero appeared remarkably intact, a prize beyond imagination. He immediately returned to Dutch Harbor to report the electrifying discovery. Within hours, a recovery party landed near the crash site. What they found exceeded their wildest hopes. The Zero had landed in perhaps the only spot on Akutan Island where the bog was soft enough to cushion the impact while being firm enough to prevent the aircraft from sinking completely. The marsh had acted like a giant shock absorber, dissipating the brutal force that would have shattered the airframe on solid ground. Aside from a crushed windscreen, bent propeller tips, broken landing gear, and damaged wingtips, the aircraft was, miraculously, fundamentally intact. The recovery team carefully removed Koga's body from the inverted cockpit and buried him, with full military honors, on a hillside overlooking the crash site. They noted the extensive medical taping around his torso, suggesting previous injuries or precautionary measures against high-acceleration maneuvers. His personal effects, including his pistol and samurai sword, were removed as vital intelligence materials. Then began the arduous and challenging task of extracting a fighter aircraft from an Aleutian bog. The recovery operation took nearly 3 weeks of backbreaking labor in some of the most inhospitable conditions on Earth. Workers constructed a makeshift road using logs and planking, slowly winching the captured fighter across half a mile of treacherous ground to Broadbite, where it could finally be loaded onto a barge. The entire operation proceeded in perpetual damp cold, with equipment that froze or rusted overnight, but the invaluable prize was worth any hardship. By late July, the Zero had been loaded aboard a cargo ship for transport to the United States. The vessel carrying history's most important captured aircraft departed the Aleutians in early August, sailing south through waters that just weeks earlier had been fiercely contested by Japanese and American fleets. The test pilot's moment of truth. The captured Zero arrived in Seattle on August 1, 1942, and was immediately transferred to a barge for the onward journey to Naval Air Station North Island near San Diego. The aircraft reached San Diego in mid-August, where it was unloaded under heavy guard and moved to a secure hangar. 24-hour military police protection ensured no souvenir hunters could possibly damage the invaluable prize. Word of the capture spread through Navy aviation circles with electric excitement. For the first time since the Zero's devastating debut at Pearl Harbor, American engineers and pilots would have the unprecedented opportunity to examine the legendary fighter in meticulous detail. Navy Captain William Leonard, who would later command a carrier division in the Pacific, called it a treasure that unlocked so many secrets at a time when the need was so great. Marine Lieutenant Colonel Kenneth Walsh, who would survive the war as an ace with 21 kills, would later state that knowing what to do with a Zero on his tail, information that came directly from studying Koga's aircraft, saved his life several times. The race was on to restore the Zero to flying condition as quickly as humanly possible. Every day the aircraft remained grounded was another day American pilots faced an enemy they did not fully understand. The restoration team worked around the clock with tireless dedication, carefully documenting every minute detail of the aircraft's construction while simultaneously repairing the crash damage. The work proceeded with astonishing speed, driven by an overwhelming sense of urgency and the profound recognition that this single aircraft might hold the crucial keys to winning the air war in the Pacific. The restoration immediately revealed profound insights into Japanese design philosophy. The Zero was built like a precision watch, one engineer noted, with flush rivets meticulously incorporated throughout the airframe and guns mounted flush with the wing surfaces to minimize drag. Every single component was painstakingly designed for minimum weight and maximum efficiency. The instrument panel displayed remarkable simplicity, with no superfluous gauges to distract the pilot, just essential instruments arranged for instant readability. Inspection panels could be opened by simply pushing on marked spots with a finger, releasing internal latches. The entire aircraft could be disassembled and reassembled using minimal tools, a crucial advantage for field maintenance on primitive island bases. The team discovered that the Zero weighed between 5,300 and 6,165 pounds fully loaded, depending on ammunition, fuel load, and configuration, a staggering 2,000 pounds lighter than the American F4F Wildcat. This extraordinary weight savings came from multiple, critical sources. The Zero utterly lacked armor protection for the pilot, relying instead on superior maneuverability to desperately avoid being hit. Its fuel tanks were not self-sealing, a terrifying trade-off of safety for drastically reduced weight and increased capacity. The airframe itself utilized minimum structural material, just enough strength for the anticipated loads with virtually no safety margin. The Zero was fundamentally the embodiment of a different design philosophy than American fighters. Where American aircraft prioritized pilot protection and structural ruggedness, accepting necessary weight penalties for survivability, the Zero courageously sacrificed protection for sheer performance. It was a fighter designed to win through superior agility rather than absorbing punishment. The captured aircraft revealed other closely guarded secrets. The engine, a 14-cylinder Nakajima Seikei radial producing approximately 950 horsepower, utilized a float-type carburetor that would prove highly significant in combat. The wings folded for carrier storage using a simple manual mechanism requiring no complex hydraulic systems. The control surfaces were fabric-covered over metal frames to further minimize weight. Most remarkably, the armament package was formidable for such a lightweight aircraft. Two 7.7mm machine guns firing through the propeller arc and two potent 20mm cannons mounted in the wings. By September 20th, just 41 days after arriving in San Diego, the Zero was fully ready to fly. The meticulous restoration team had replaced the crushed windscreen, carefully straightened the vertical stabilizer and rudder, expertly repaired the wingtips and flaps, and completely rebuilt the landing gear that had been sheared off in the crash. The original three-blade Sumitomo propeller was carefully dressed and reused. The captured aircraft was then repainted. The iconic red Japanese Heinemer roundels were covered with American blue circle and white star insignia. It looked like an American aircraft wearing Japanese clothes. Lieutenant Commander Eddie Sanders, selected as chief test pilot for this critical project, had spent the entire previous week meticulously studying every aspect of the Zero while mechanics completed the final stages of restoration. He sat in the cockpit for hours, familiarizing himself with the Japanese instruments, painstakingly memorizing the control layout, and mentally preparing himself for a flight unlike any he had ever attempted. Sanders was an exceptionally experienced test pilot, but he was about to fly an enemy aircraft whose true flight characteristics could only be guessed from intelligence reports and scattered combat observations. If those reports were accurate, the Zero was faster, climbed better, and turned tighter than any American fighter. If those reports were wrong, or if the captured aircraft harbored hidden structural damage, Sanders might not survive the very first flight. On the morning of September 20th, 1942, Sanders climbed into the Zero's cockpit for the first time as pilot rather than student. Ground crew expertly started the engine, which caught immediately and ran with a smooth, powerful hum. The restoration team's meticulous work was vindicated. Sanders taxied to the runway, acutely conscious that dozens of engineers, intelligence officers, and high-ranking Navy brass were watching from the tower and flight line, their hopes and fears riding on this single flight. He advanced the throttle, and the Zero accelerated down the runway with surprising eagerness. The lightweight fighter lifted off after a remarkably short ground roll, climbing at a rate that would have been impressive in any American aircraft. For the next hour, Sanders put the Zero through a rigorous series of performance tests, carefully and systematically exploring its entire flight envelope. He climbed to altitude, tested stall characteristics, practiced basic maneuvers, and keenly felt out the aircraft's precise handling qualities. What he discovered in that initial, revelatory flight would fundamentally change everything, unmasking the flaws, the Zero's Achilles heels. Immediately apparent was a crucial, debilitating flaw. The ailerons virtually froze up at speeds above 200 knots, making rapid rolling maneuvers at those speeds sluggish and requiring immense physical force on the control stick. Sanders wrote in his report, "The Zero rolled to the left much easier than to the right. The high-speed aileron problem was dramatic and completely unexpected. At low speeds, the Zero's maneuverability was everything Japanese pilots claimed, capable of effortlessly turning inside any American fighter. But above 200 knots, roughly 230 miles per hour, the ailerons became increasingly heavy and dangerously unresponsive. The fabric-covered control surfaces literally ballooned with air pressure at high speeds, demanding enormous stick force to overcome. American fighters, with their robust metal-covered control surfaces and reliable hydraulic boost systems, maintained full control authority at all speeds, a distinct advantage. Sanders discovered a second critical weakness during negative acceleration maneuvers. When he pushed the stick forward sharply, inducing negative gravitational forces, negative GS, the Zero's engine coughed violently and died. The float-type carburetor, ingeniously designed for positive and zero gravity conditions, simply could not maintain fuel flow during sustained negative acceleration. The engine would restart when positive acceleration resumed, but for several precious, life-threatening seconds, the Zero became a powerless glider. This profound weakness had immediate and dramatic tactical implications that Sanders recognized instantly. American pilots, often finding themselves outmaneuvered and desperately unable to escape a pursuing Zero, now had their answer. Sanders noted in his report, "Go into a vertical power dive using negative acceleration if possible to open the range while the Zero's engine was stopped by the forces involved. At about 200 knots, roll hard right before the Zero pilot could get his sights lined up." Sanders completed 24 test flights over the next 25 days, each one meticulously revealing additional crucial details about the Zero's capabilities and, more importantly, its severe limitations. He tested the aircraft at various altitudes, power settings, and combat configurations. He performed mock dogfights against American fighters with other test pilots flying F-4F Wildcats and newer aircraft. The extensive data accumulated from these flights was extraordinary. The Zero's maximum speed was found to be slightly less than the F-4F Wildcat, directly contrary to previous combat reports suggesting the Japanese fighter was faster. Sanders speculated this might be due to reconstruction weight, as the restoration team had been unable to source exact replacement materials for some components. However, the Zero's exceptional range, exceeding 1,900 statute miles, far outstripped any American carrier fighter. The aircraft could remain airborne for over 6 hours, enabling it to escort bombers deep into enemy territory or patrol vast expanses of ocean. The Zero's rate of climb significantly exceeded American fighters, capable of reaching 20,000 feet faster than an F-4F could reach 15,000 feet. In turning combat at low speeds, the Zero could complete a full circle in the time American fighters could complete only 3/4 of a turn. These superior performance characteristics clearly explained why early war combat had so decisively favored Japanese pilots. At low speeds and in turning fights, the Zero was simply superior to anything America fielded in late 1941 and early 1942. But Sanders' rigorous tests starkly revealed that these impressive advantages came with devastating, exploitable weaknesses. The Zero's extremely light construction meant it could not withstand battle damage. Hits that would merely damage an American fighter often proved fatal to the Zero, which utterly lacked both pilot armor and crucial self-sealing fuel tanks. Wright Field's materials analysis of captured Zero components revealed aluminum alloys of excellent quality, but used in dangerously thin thicknesses that American designers would consider grossly inadequate. The Zero was built to minimum tolerances with virtually no safety margins for absorbing combat damage. Sanders' final report powerfully synthesized all the accumulated test data into clear, actionable intelligence. American pilots should, at all costs, avoid slow-speed turning fights where the Zero's unparalleled maneuverability dominated. Instead, they should aggressively use diving attacks, utilizing the superior high-speed characteristics and robust construction of American fighters. When a Zero pursued, American pilots should immediately enter a steep dive, preferably with negative acceleration to temporarily kill the Zero's engine, then execute a hard right roll at high speed, where the Zero simply could not follow. American fighters, with their superior armor and devastating firepower, should absorb hits while delivering concentrated, destructive bursts that would obliterate the fragile Zero. Team tactics should vigorously replace individual dogfighting, with wingmen covering each other and using coordinated attacks to negate the Zero's turning advantage. These critical recommendations were compiled and distributed throughout the fleet with unprecedented speed. Pilots preparing for combat received detailed, life-saving briefings on the Zero's exact characteristics and precisely how to exploit its weaknesses. The vital information was immediately incorporated into training programs, with instructors diligently teaching the high-speed dive and hard right roll technique to every new pilot. Combat veterans who had survived early, terrifying encounters with Zeros suddenly understood, with immense relief, exactly what they had been fighting and, crucially, how to win. The impact on pilot morale was profound and immediate. For 8 brutal months, American naval aviators had faced an aircraft that seemed invincible, capable of out-turning and out-climbing anything they flew. Pilots had developed a healthy respect for the Zero that bordered on paralyzing fear. The official American tactic when jumped by Zeros had been simply to run away, a humiliating admission of inferiority. Now, for the first time, American pilots had concrete knowledge of how to fight the Zero and win. The debilitating mystique surrounding the Japanese fighter began to crumble. It was still a formidable opponent, but it was no longer invincible. It had weaknesses, and American pilots now knew exactly what those weaknesses were and, vitally, how to exploit them. The Hellcat's genesis, intelligence informs design. However, the Akutan Zero's greatest contribution was not just to tactical doctrine. It was to aircraft design, specifically to a fighter that was already under development when Koga tragically crashed in the Aleutians. The Grumman F6F Hellcat would become the devastating weapon that transformed American tactical knowledge into overwhelming combat results. The story of how the Hellcat came to be and how the Akutan Zero influenced its development has been subject to vigorous historical debate, with some claiming the Hellcat was designed based on the captured Zero, while others correctly note the timeline makes direct, originating influence impossible. The truth lies somewhere in between. A compelling story of parallel development, timely intelligence, and Grumman's unparalleled ability to incorporate crucial lessons learned even as their fighter was rapidly entering full-scale production. January 1942. Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation, Bethpage, Long Island, New York. Leroy Grumman sat at his desk, intently reviewing preliminary designs for what would eventually become the F6F Hellcat, and the raw numbers troubled him deeply. The Navy desperately needed a fighter to replace the venerable F4F Wildcat, something faster and significantly more powerful to counter the alarming reports streaming in from the Pacific about Japanese air superiority. Grumman's talented design team, led by chief engineers Jake Swerble and Bill Schwindler, had created what was essentially a larger, more powerful Wildcat. The design looked good on paper, but Grumman worried it might not be a sufficient improvement. The early months of 1942 brought increasingly alarming reports from the Pacific. American pilots were being outfought by Japanese Zeros at virtually every encounter. The F4F Wildcat, Grumman's current frontline fighter, was proving tragically inadequate despite being a solid, well-built aircraft. Combat reports unequivocally indicated the Zero could outclimb, outturn, and outrange the Wildcat in nearly every critical performance category. Something dramatically better was needed, and needed with absolute urgency. Grumman's initial F6F, designated XF6F-1, was planned around the Wright R-2600 Cyclone engine, producing 1,700 horsepower. This would give the new fighter significantly more power than the Wildcat's 1,200 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R-1830, but Grumman acutely questioned whether it was enough of an improvement. The company had been developing the XF6F-1 since mid-1941, with the formal contract signed on June 30, 1941, nearly a full year before Koga Zero crashed in the Aleutians. The design work proceeded with astonishing rapidity through early 1942, driven by urgent Navy requirements and Grumman's keen, prescient recognition that the Pacific War would ultimately be won or lost in the air. The Bureau of Aeronautics worked closely with Grumman engineers, eagerly incorporating crucial feedback from combat pilots returning, often shaken, from the Pacific. On April 22, 1942, 6 weeks before the Battle of Midway and 7 weeks before Koga's crash, Lieutenant Commander Edward Butch O'Hare visited Grumman's Bethpage facility. O'Hare, fresh from harrowing combat operations in which he had single-handedly defended the carrier Lexington against Japanese bombers, earning the Medal of Honor, met with Grumman engineers to discuss the F4F Wildcat's performance against the Zero. His insights were sobering and direct. The Zero was faster than American intelligence had estimated, climbed better than seemed physically possible for its engine power, and could turn inside the Wildcat with unnerving ease. O'Hare powerfully emphasized that American fighters needed more raw power, a dramatically better climb rate, and drastically improved visibility for the pilot. The day before meeting with Grumman engineers, O'Hare had met with President Franklin Roosevelt during the Medal of Honor presentation ceremony. The president asked what was critically needed in a new naval fighter. O'Hare's response was direct and memorable: a plane that will go upstairs faster. Bureau of Aeronautics Lieutenant Commander A.M. Jackson, working closely with Grumman, directed specific, vital design changes based on this crucial combat experience. Jackson emphasized mounting the cockpit higher in the fuselage with the forward fuselage sloping down slightly to the engine cowling, thus giving the pilot excellent, unobstructed visibility over the nose. He stressed to Grumman engineers, with profound clarity, that you cannot hit them if you cannot see them. These crucial changes were incorporated into the XF6F design before Koga Zero was even discovered. On April 26, 1942, 5 weeks before Koga's final flight, the Bureau of Aeronautics made a critical, defining decision that would fundamentally shape the F6F's character. Based on ongoing combat accounts from the Pacific and O'Hare's recommendations, BUA directed Grumman to install a significantly more powerful engine in the second XF6F prototype. The Wright R-2600 was abandoned in favor of the mighty Pratt & Whitney R-2800 Double Wasp, an 18-cylinder radial engine producing a colossal 2,000 horsepower. This was the same engine already being used in the Vought F4U Corsair and Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, and it represented a staggering 50% increase in power over the original XF6F-1 design. Grumman swiftly complied by boldly redesigning and substantially strengthening the F6F airframe to handle the massive new engine. This change required significant modifications to the engine mount, cooling system, and structural components throughout the entire aircraft. It certainly meant frustrating delays in the development schedule, but the anticipated, game-changing performance gains would be well worth it. Grumman estimated the new power plant would increase performance by an impressive 25% over the original design. The engine change decision emanated from multiple critical factors converging simultaneously. The R-2800 had already proven remarkably reliable in testing and was rapidly entering full-scale production for other vital aircraft programs. Pratt & Whitney could provide engines without the frustrating delays plaguing the Wright R-2600 development. Most importantly, combat reports unequivocally indicated that incremental improvements would no longer be sufficient. American fighters urgently needed a quantum leap in performance to match, and then decisively exceed, the Zero's capabilities. The first XF6F-1 prototype, still fitted with the less powerful Wright R-2600 Cyclone engine, made its maiden flight on June 26, 1942, with test pilot Bob Hall at the controls. This was 8 days before Koga tragically crashed in the Aleutians and 6 weeks before the Zero was actually discovered. The prototype performed well, demonstrating good handling characteristics and no serious vices, but its performance with the 1,700 horsepower Cyclone engine unequivocally confirmed Grumman's prescient concerns that far more power was desperately needed. The second prototype, designated XF6F-3 and now powerfully fitted with the 2,000 horsepower R-2800 Double Wasp, first flew on July 30, 1942. This was 20 days after the Akutan Zero was discovered, but crucially 2 months before it would be restored to flying condition and meticulously tested. The XF6F-3's performance dramatically exceeded all expectations. The additional raw power gloriously transformed the design, giving it the climb rate and speed needed to finally compete with the Zero on equal terms. Akutan Zero's direct, indispensable influence. But the Hellcat's relentless development did not stop there. Throughout the pivotal summer of 1942, Grumman engineers continued refining the design based on ongoing, vital combat reports and invaluable intelligence streaming in from the Pacific. When the Akutan Zero finally arrived in San Diego in mid-August, detailed technical data began flowing to the Bureau of Aeronautics and, crucially, to Grumman within days. The captured aircraft had not yet flown, but meticulous physical examination immediately revealed crucial information about its construction, exact weight, armament, and fundamental design philosophy. This priceless intelligence arrived at an absolutely critical juncture in the F6F's development. The basic design was firmly set, the definitive engine selected, and the first prototypes already flying, but full-scale production had not yet begun, meaning vital, game-changing adjustments could still be incorporated relatively easily. Grumman engineers studied the Zero data with intense, urgent interest, looking for every possible way to ensure their fighter could not just match, but decisively exceed the Japanese aircraft's capabilities. The Zero weighed between 5,300 and 6,100 pounds fully loaded. The F6F, by contrast, would weigh over 12,000 pounds. This enormous weight penalty, more than double the Zero's weight, had to be intelligently compensated by massive additional power and profoundly clever design. Grumman's underlying philosophy differed fundamentally from the Japanese approach. Where the Zero bravely sacrificed crucial protection for raw performance, the F6F would provide both. Leroy Grumman, the company's shrewd and visionary founder, made a pivotal decision after carefully studying the Zero data. He determined that Grumman could match or surpass the Zero in most critical respects without sacrificing essential pilot armor, self-sealing fuel tanks, and a robust fuselage structure. The F6F would compensate for its necessary extra weight with the sheer, raw, overwhelming power from the R-2800 engine. This pivotal decision shaped everything that followed. The F6F would be built tough, truly capable of absorbing battle damage that would utterly destroy a Zero. It would meticulously protect its pilot with armor plate behind the seat and a bulletproof windscreen. It would carry self-sealing fuel tanks that could take multiple hits without catastrophic fires. It would possess redundant systems and a robust structure capable of withstanding both hard carrier landings and intense, punishing combat damage. The weight penalty would be brilliantly overcome by raw power and intelligent design that extracted the absolute most from available performance. The detailed data from the Akutan Zero, combined with ongoing combat reports and Sanders revealing test flights in September and October, directly influenced numerous specific design decisions as the F6F moved decisively toward full-scale production. The F6F's wings were designed for superior high-speed performance, utilizing a different airfoil and control surface design than the Wildcat. Crucially, the ailerons were hydraulically boosted and metal-covered, ensuring full control authority at all speeds. This directly addressed the devastating high-speed aileron problem Sanders had discovered in the captured Zero. The F6F would be able to roll effectively and precisely at speeds where the Zero's controls locked up completely. The F6F's fuel system utilized a pressure carburetor rather than the unreliable float type used in the Zero. This ensured the engine would continue running flawlessly under negative acceleration, eliminating the debilitating weakness Sanders had so shrewdly exploited in his test flights. An F6F pilot could now dive away from a pursuing Zero without his engine quitting at the crucial life-or-death moment. The F6F structure was designed to handle 9G positive and 6G negative acceleration, far exceeding the Zero's dangerously limited structural limits. This meant F6F pilots could use aggressive, violent maneuvers without fear of structural failure, while Zeros desperately attempting to follow would risk catastrophic breakup. The armament package was powerfully increased to 6.50 caliber machine guns compared to the Wildcat's 4. Later versions would offer the option of 2 potent 20mm cannons and 4.50 caliber guns. This concentrated firepower could utterly destroy the lightly built Zero with short, devastating bursts, while the F6F's heavily armored structure could absorb return fire. Visibility from the cockpit was exceptional, with the raised pilot position providing clear, unobstructed views in all directions. This directly addressed Jackson's critical emphasis that pilots cannot shoot what they cannot see. The design incorporated crucial lessons from the thatch weave and other defensive tactics, recognizing that superior visibility was paramount for effective mutual support between wingmen. On October 3, 1942, the first production F6F-3 made its maiden flight, just 2 weeks after Sanders completed his initial test flights in the Akutan Zero. The timing was not coincidental. Production had been deliberately, strategically delayed until engineers could incorporate the latest, vital intelligence. The myth that the F6F was designed based solely on the Akutan Zero is demonstrably false, given that the basic design fundamentally predated Koga's crash, and the decisive engine change decision came before the Zero was even discovered. But the perfect timing allowed Grumman to brilliantly refine the F6F's final configuration based on priceless knowledge gained from the captured aircraft, incorporating crucial tactical lessons before production ramped up. The Hellcat dominates, a legacy forged in combat. The first production F6F-3S began reaching fleet squadrons in early 1943. Fighting Squadron 9 received the first operational Hellcats in February 1943, embarking on the carrier Essex for intensive training and workup. The pilot's reaction to the new fighter was nothing short of enthusiastic. After months of fighting in F4F Wildcats, often struggling valiantly against superior Japanese aircraft, the F6F felt like a quantum leap in capability. It was faster, climbed better, possessed devastating firepower, offered vastly superior visibility, and felt incredibly solid and robust in a way the Wildcat never had. Pilots quickly discovered the F6F was remarkably easy to fly. Grumman had meticulously designed it specifically to be operated by relatively inexperienced pilots fresh from training, shrewdly recognizing that wartime expansion would rapidly flood the fleet with newly minted aviators. The F6F had no bad habits, no tricky, unforgiving characteristics that could fatally trap an unwary pilot. It was stable, predictable, and remarkably forgiving of mistakes. Carrier landings, often the most challenging and terrifying aspect of naval aviation, were straightforward in the Hellcat. The robust landing gear absorbed hard, jarring impacts that would have instantly collapsed lesser aircraft. The excellent visibility allowed pilots to precisely judge their approach. The controls remained responsive and predictable even at the low speeds required for nerve-wracking carrier approaches. Production ramped up with astonishing speed. Grumman constructed a new, dedicated factory at Bethpage specifically for F6F production, with the first aircraft rolling off the assembly line before the factory buildings were even fully completed. At peak production in 1944, Grumman produced an incredible 644 aircraft in a single month, an astonishing rate of 1 Hellcat per hour, an aircraft production record never equaled. The scale was staggering. Each F6F required approximately 20,000 individual parts, meticulously sourced from hundreds of subcontractors. The powerful Pratt & Whitney engines were built in 3 separate factories and shipped to Bethpage for installation. Grumman coordinated this industrial symphony with a precision that amazed even the most seasoned observers. Much of the credit went to Jake Swerbel, Grumman's legendary production genius, who organized the complex workflow and vast supply chain with unprecedented efficiency. Many Grumman workers had never built aircraft before, yet they produced the most successful carrier fighter of the war. Between the first production flight in October 1942 and the end of the war in November 1945, a span of approximately 37 months, Grumman would produce a staggering 12,275 F6F Hellcats from a single factory complex. The F6F made its combat debut on August 31, 1943, 15 months after the Akutan Zero was discovered and 11 months after Sanders' first test flight. Aircraft from Fighting Squadrons 5 and 9, operating from carriers Yorktown and Independence, attacked Marcus Island as part of a carrier raid. The mission was an overwhelming success. No Japanese fighters managed to get airborne, and several were destroyed on the ground. 2 Hellcats were lost to anti-aircraft fire. But in initial air-to-air combat, the F6F immediately demonstrated its clear, crushing superiority. Over the following months, the F6F became the undisputed standard fighter on American fleet carriers, gradually replacing the F4F Wildcat on the large carriers, while Wildcats continued serving valiantly on smaller escort carriers. By early 1944, the Hellcat equipped 15 carrier fighter squadrons and was rapidly becoming the dominant American naval fighter in the Pacific. The crucial tactical lessons learned from the Akutan Zero were meticulously incorporated into every aspect of F6F operations. Pilots were rigorously trained to avoid slow-speed turning fights unless they had a significant altitude or numerical advantage. Instead, F6F doctrine powerfully emphasized high-speed slashing attacks, diving from altitude to build overwhelming speed, making a single devastating firing pass, then zooming back to altitude before the more maneuverable Zeros could possibly respond. The Thatch Weave, developed by Lieutenant Commander John Thatch even before the Zero was captured, became standard defensive doctrine for all F6F squadrons. When jumped by Zeros, F6F pilots flew in mutually supporting pairs, weaving back and forth so that any Zero pursuing one F6F would immediately face punishing head-on fire from the other. This brilliant tactic effectively neutralized the Zero's turning advantage by forcing the Japanese pilot to either break off or face a head-on engagement, where the F6F's superior firepower and robust protection decisively dominated. Pilots were rigorously taught to use their speed and power to dictate the terms of engagement. If the tactical situation favored the F6F, they engaged. If not, they used superior speed to disengage, reposition, and attack from a position of overwhelming advantage. The F6F's formidable climb rate allowed it to regain altitude quickly after diving attacks. Its speed allowed it to escape from unfavorable situations. Its impressive endurance allowed it to patrol longer and chase fleeing enemies farther than Zeros could possibly follow. November 23, 1943, Gilbert Islands. F6F Hellcats from carrier Essex engaged Japanese Zero fighters over Tarawa in what would become the first major, definitive test of the new fighter against Japan's best. 30 Zeros rose to intercept the American strike, and the ensuing dogfight raged across the skies over the invasion beaches. When the smoke cleared, American pilots claimed 30 Japanese fighters destroyed for the loss of a single F6F. The Battle of Tarawa demonstrated everything the F6F was designed to accomplish. American pilots, many of them relatively inexperienced, had met veteran Japanese aviators flying Zeros and utterly crushed them. The potent combination of superior aircraft performance, sound tactics based on detailed knowledge of the Zero's weaknesses, and intensive training had created an unbeatable formula. The battle's outcomes sent shock waves through both American and Japanese commands. For the Americans, it validated the F6F's design and the tactical doctrines meticulously developed from studying the Akutan Zero. For the Japanese, it revealed, with chilling clarity, that American aircraft had caught up to and decisively surpassed the Zero's capabilities. The age of Japanese air superiority was definitively ending, but Tarawa was merely the beginning. The F6F would prove its worth in every major engagement across the Pacific for the next 20 months, compiling the most dominant combat record of any American fighter in World War II. June 19, 1944, Philippine Sea, west of the Mariana Islands. F6F Hellcats from 15 American aircraft carriers, 7 large fleet carriers, and 8 light carriers of Task Force 58, prepared to face the largest Japanese carrier aviation force assembled since the Battle of Midway 2 years earlier. The Japanese had 9 aircraft carriers and sent wave after wave of aircraft to destroy the American invasion fleet attacking Saipan. What followed became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, the most one-sided aerial battle in naval history. The first Japanese strike, 69 aircraft, lost 42 planes before even reaching the American fleet. The remaining 27 that bravely penetrated to the carriers accomplished nothing while facing a storm of anti-aircraft fire and swarming F6Fs. The second wave, 107 Japanese aircraft, tragically lost 97 before they could even attack. Japanese carrier aviation was being systematically, brutally destroyed. Throughout the day, Japanese carriers launched 370 aircraft in multiple strikes. Only 130 returned. The F6F Hellcats, flying combat air patrol over the American fleet and relentlessly hunting Japanese strike groups, shot down the vast majority. American losses totaled a mere 23 to 30 aircraft, with many pilots heroically rescued from the ocean. The strategic impact was catastrophic for Japan. The carrier air groups painstakingly rebuilt after the devastating losses at Midway were utterly annihilated. The experienced pilots who had trained the current generation were dead. The aircraft that had been hoarded for the decisive battle were gone. Japanese naval aviation would never recover from this single day's losses. The Battle of the Philippine Sea starkly demonstrated the F6F operating at peak, devastating effectiveness. The aircraft's exceptional endurance allowed continuous combat air patrols over the fleet. Its formidable climb rate ensured F6Fs could intercept incoming strikes at optimal altitude. Its speed allowed relentless pursuit of fleeing Japanese aircraft. Its firepower and robust protection meant that in any head-to-head engagement, the F6F held an overwhelming and decisive advantage. But perhaps most importantly, the F6F's inherent ease of handling meant that even relatively inexperienced American pilots could operate the aircraft effectively in combat. By mid-1944, the United States was producing pilots far faster than Japan, and the F6F allowed these new aviators to be thrown into combat with confidence they could survive and succeed. Japanese pilots, by contrast, were receiving increasingly abbreviated training as fuel shortages and instructor losses mounted. By late 1944, Japanese pilots were entering combat with perhaps one-third the flight hours American pilots received. This brutal experience differential, combined with the F6F's clear technical superiority, created a death spiral for Japanese aviation. Every engagement cost Japan irreplaceable pilots, while American losses were quickly replaced by a vast training pipeline that was producing thousands of new aviators annually. Versatility and an unmatched combat record. The F6F's immense contribution to American victory extended far beyond aerial combat. The aircraft was ingeniously adapted into multiple specialized variants that addressed specific tactical needs. The F6F, 3N, and F6F, 5N night fighter variants carried radar equipment in a pod mounted on the starboard wing, allowing them to intercept Japanese night bombing raids. The radar reduced top speed slightly, but night fighter pilots found the critical capability well worth the trade-off. F6F night fighters achieved remarkable success against Japanese night raiders, shooting down bombers that had previously attacked with impunity under cover of darkness. The F6F, 3P, and F6F, 5P photographic reconnaissance variants replaced guns with cameras, conducting crucial reconnaissance missions deep over enemy territory. Their impressive speed and range allowed them to penetrate deep into Japanese-held areas, photograph vital targets, and escape before interceptors could respond. Later F6F, 5 variants were modified to carry 2,000-pound bombs on a centerline rack and rocket rails under the wings, transforming the fighter into a highly effective fighter bomber. F6Fs armed with bombs and rockets provided devastating close-air support for Marine and Army forces fighting across Pacific Islands, attacking Japanese bunkers, artillery positions, and troop concentrations with a precision that artillery could not match. By the end of World War II, F6F Hellcats had compiled combat statistics that remain utterly unmatched by any other American fighter. The aircraft was credited with destroying 5,163 enemy aircraft in Pacific air-to-air combat by United States Navy and Marine Corps pilots, with an additional 60 aircraft destroyed in other theaters, including British Royal Navy Fleet Air Arm victories, bringing the total to a staggering 5,223. Only 270 F6Fs were lost in air-to-air combat, giving the aircraft an astonishing overall kill-to-loss ratio of 19-1. Against Japanese Zeros specifically, the ratio was an equally impressive 13-1. These numbers powerfully reflected the combined impact of superior aircraft performance, sound tactical doctrine meticulously derived from studying the Akutan Zero, and increasingly skilled American pilots facing rapidly declining Japanese opposition. The F6F produced more fighter aces than any other Allied aircraft of World War II. Between 305 and 307 Navy Hellcat pilots achieved ace status, 5 or more victories, with slight variations in counts depending on how shared kills were attributed. The Navy's top ace, Commander David McCampbell, scored all 34 of his victories flying F6Fs. The Hellcats' combat record was so overwhelmingly dominant that late-war Japanese pilots developed what American intelligence chillingly called zero fatigue, a grim recognition that engaging F6Fs was likely to be fatal. Japanese pilots increasingly avoided combat when possible, desperately diving away or fleeing into clouds rather than fighting. This psychological dominance was as important as the technical superiority, as it allowed American carrier groups to operate with near impunity, knowing Japanese air opposition would be minimal and utterly ineffective. The stark contrast with early war combat was profound. In 1942, American pilots had fled from Zeros whenever possible. By 1945, Japanese pilots were fleeing from Hellcats. The transformation was complete. The enduring ghost of Akutan Zero. The Akutan Zero's pivotal role in this transformation cannot be precisely quantified, but its profound importance is undeniable. The captured aircraft provided the first detailed, tangible intelligence on the Zero's actual capabilities and critical limitations. Sanders' meticulous test flights revealed specific, exploitable weaknesses that could be leveraged tactically. The technical data profoundly influenced crucial F6F design decisions at an absolutely critical moment when vital changes could still be incorporated. Most importantly, the Akutan Zero completely shattered the debilitating mystique surrounding the Japanese fighter, proving it was not invincible, but rather an aircraft with specific strengths and, crucially, specific weaknesses. The potent combination of the F6F Hellcat and the vital tactical knowledge gained from the Akutan Zero created a powerful synergy that utterly transformed American naval aviation. The F6F was not designed because of the Akutan Zero, but it was refined based on invaluable intelligence from the captured aircraft. The tactics American pilots used were not created by studying the Zero, but they were validated and formalized by Sanders' test flights and subsequent meticulous analysis. The ultimate result was an integrated system of aircraft, tactics, training, and overwhelming industrial production that simply swamped Japanese aviation. By war's end, Japan had produced approximately 10,500 Zeros, their primary fighter throughout the conflict. The United States produced 12,275 F6F Hellcats in 37 months, plus thousands of F4U Corsairs and other formidable fighters. The production differential powerfully reflected America's gargantuan industrial might, but the combat differential starkly reflected the F6F's clear technical superiority and the brilliant tactical doctrine that employed it with devastating effectiveness. The Akutan Zero was ironically destroyed in February 1945 in a training accident rather than combat. While taxiing for takeoff at Naval Air Station North Island, an SB-2C Helldiver dive bomber tragically lost control and crashed into the parked Zero, its propeller slicing the Japanese fighter into pieces. William Leonard salvaged several gauges from the wreckage, donating them to the National Museum of the United States Navy. The Alaska Heritage Museum and Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum also preserved small fragments. The physical aircraft was gone, but its profound legacy lived on in every F6F that flew combat missions, in every American pilot who knew the Zero's weaknesses, and in every tactical manual that incorporated lessons learned from Sanders' crucial test flights. Koga's body, initially buried on Akutan Island, was exhumed by American Graves Registration Service teams in 1947 and reinterred on Adak Island, further down the Aleutian chain. In 1953, the Adak Cemetery was excavated and 236 bodies, likely including Koga's remains, were repatriated to Japan for burial. The young pilot, who died at age 19, became an unwitting, tragic contributor to Japan's defeat, his perfectly preserved aircraft revealing secrets that would ultimately doom thousands of his countrymen. The historical debate about the Akutan Zero's importance continues. Some historians fervently argue it was the single most important intelligence capture of the Pacific War, more valuable than code-breaking or any other source. Others contend that American victory was inevitable regardless, and the Zero's capture merely accelerated trends already underway. Japanese historian and Air Self-Defense Force Lieutenant General Masatake Okimiya, who flew as a staff officer in most major Pacific carrier battles, unequivocally stated that the acquisition of the Akutan Zero was no less serious than the Japanese defeat at Midway. The Zero's secrets being revealed to American engineers and test pilots represented a catastrophic intelligence failure whose consequences rippled with devastating effect throughout the remaining war years. Fighter ace William Leonard called the captured Zero a treasure that unlocked so many secrets at a time when the need was so great. Marine ace Kenneth Walsh credited intelligence from Koga's Zero with saving his life several times, the tactical knowledge allowing him to survive early encounters that might otherwise have been fatal. The truth likely incorporates elements of all these perspectives. The Akutan Zero was not solely responsible for American victory, which rested on industrial capacity, code-breaking, submarine warfare, and numerous other factors, but it was an absolutely crucial piece of the puzzle, arriving at exactly the right moment to profoundly influence aircraft design decisions and tactical doctrine development. Without the Akutan Zero, the F6F would still have been an excellent fighter. American industry would still have overwhelmed Japan's production, and American victory would likely have been achieved. But the process might have taken longer, cost more American lives, and involved greater uncertainty about how to defeat the Zero's formidable capabilities. The 19-to-1 kill ratio represented the glorious culmination of multiple factors converging perfectly. Superior aircraft design that prioritized both performance and pilot protection. Brilliant tactical doctrine derived from meticulously studying the enemy's capabilities and weaknesses. Rigorous training that prepared pilots for the brutal realities of combat. Overwhelming industrial production that ensured numerical superiority. And, crucially, detailed, actionable intelligence about the enemies. Primary weapon gained from a single, nearly intact example captured by sheer chance in the Aleutian wilderness. American servicemen who flew F6F Hellcats during the war gathered at various reunions over the decades following World War II. Many were F6F Hellcat pilots who had dominated the skies over the Pacific, now sharing their poignant memories and honoring fallen comrades. The speakers at these gatherings repeatedly referenced the Akutan Zero and the priceless intelligence it provided. They spoke of how knowing the Zero's weaknesses had instilled a new, fierce confidence in combat. They vividly described using the high-speed dive and hard right-roll technique Sanders had discovered. They explained how the F6F's very design incorporated lessons learned from the captured Japanese fighter. Veterans consistently emphasized a common, powerful theme. "We were told the Zero was invincible," one former fighter ace explained. "We believed it because we had seen what it could do to our aircraft in early combat. Then we learned its secrets from the captured plane in Alaska. We learned it could not roll at high speed. We learned its engine quit under negative acceleration. We learned it was fragile and would burn if hit. And suddenly, it was no longer invincible. It was just another aircraft, one we could beat if we flew smart. The F6F gave us the tools. The Akutan Zero gave us the knowledge. Together, they gave us victory." The F6F Hellcat remained in frontline service through the end of World War II, gradually being supplemented by the F4U Corsair as that aircraft's carrier landing problems were resolved. After the war, Hellcats were quickly phased out of fleet service, replaced by jets and more modern propeller fighters. Many went to reserve squadrons where they served into the early 1950s. Others were converted to target drones or scrapped. The last Navy Hellcat was retired in 1954, just 9 years after the war ended. This rapid obsolescence was a powerful testament to how quickly aviation technology advanced during and after World War II. An aircraft that was state-of-the-art in 1943 was hopelessly outdated by 1954, unable to compete with jets that flew twice as fast and climbed 3 times as quickly. But the Hellcat's legendary combat record ensured it would never be forgotten. Museum displays across the United States proudly feature preserved F6Fs, many meticulously restored to flying condition. Airshow crowds watch with awe as vintage Hellcats perform, their distinctive sound and profile evoking a bygone era when American naval aviation achieved overwhelming dominance through a potent combination of engineering excellence and tactical brilliance. Approximately 70 F6F Hellcats survive in museums and private collections worldwide. 7 remain airworthy, all based in the United States, regularly flown at air shows and commemorative events. Each flight is a poignant reminder of the 12,275 aircraft that rolled off Grumman's assembly lines, the thousands of pilots who flew them in combat, and the 5,000 enemy aircraft they destroyed. The Akutan Zero itself lives on only in fragments scattered across museums and in thousands of pages of test reports and intelligence analyses archived in the National Archives. But its impact on the Pacific War far exceeded its physical presence. A single aircraft, captured by chance, meticulously tested for a few months, and ironically destroyed in an accident, contributed to American victory in ways that can never be precisely measured, but can never be dismissed. Lieutenant Commander Eddie Sanders, the courageous test pilot who first flew the Akutan Zero, lived to see the F6F's unparalleled combat success. He continued serving in various aviation test and evaluation roles throughout the war, contributing significantly to development programs for multiple aircraft types. After the war, he retired from the Navy and worked in the thriving aerospace industry, his invaluable expertise in aircraft testing invaluable in the rapid technological advancement of the post-war era. He passed away in the 1970s, having witnessed the complete transformation of naval aviation from propeller fighters to supersonic jets. Sanders rarely spoke publicly about his role in testing the Akutan Zero, considering it simply one assignment among many in a distinguished career devoted to naval aviation. But those who served with him recognized the profound importance of his work. His careful test flights, detailed reports, and analytical insights had contributed directly to American tactical doctrine and indirectly to crucial F6F design decisions. He was a quiet, dedicated professional who did his job superbly at a moment when it mattered most. The broader lesson from the Akutan Zero and F6F Hellcat story extends powerfully beyond World War II. Modern military forces spend billions on intelligence gathering, technical analysis, and threat assessment because the Akutan Zero example vividly proved how valuable detailed knowledge of enemy capabilities can be. Every captured enemy aircraft, every defector who brings technical information, every intelligence source that reveals enemy weaknesses is potentially another Akutan Zero, a critical key that unlocks tactical and technological advantages. Understanding your enemy's capabilities and limitations can literally mean the difference between victory and defeat. A single piece of hardware, properly analyzed and exploited, can influence the design of weapon systems, the development of tactics, and the ultimate outcome of battles. The Akutan Zero arrived at precisely the perfect moment when it could most profoundly influence F6F development. Sanders' test flights revealed weaknesses at exactly the time when American pilots desperately needed confidence to face the Zero. The tactical lessons were swiftly distributed when training programs could most effectively incorporate them. A year earlier or later, the impact might have been minimal. The timing was impeccable, and America exploited it fully. The Zero in 1942 was arguably the world's best carrier fighter, superior in many critical respects to anything America fielded. But America's unparalleled ability to produce thousands of F6Fs, train tens of thousands of pilots, and sustain combat operations across a vast ocean gave it decisive advantages the Zero's technical excellence simply could not overcome. Quality matters immensely, but quantity has a profound quality of its own, especially when combined with piercing tactical intelligence and sound doctrine. The F6F Hellcat and the Akutan Zero represent two powerful sides of this equation. The Hellcat was the glorious product of American industrial might, engineering skill, and tactical intelligence synthesis. The Akutan Zero was fortune's extraordinary gift to American intelligence, a stroke of luck that revealed crucial, game-changing information about the enemy's capabilities. Together, they created a combination that proved unstoppable, transforming American naval aviation from defensive inferiority in early 1942 to overwhelming dominance by mid-1944. The young Japanese pilot who tragically died in an Aleutian bog could not have known that his perfectly preserved fighter would contribute so directly and profoundly to his nation's defeat. His wingmen, desperately hoping he survived, could not have known that their mercy in not destroying his aircraft would tragically doom thousands of their comrades. The American salvage crews, struggling valiantly in that Alaskan marsh, could not have known they were recovering the very key to air superiority in the Pacific. And Eddie Sanders, taxiing that captured Zero for its first American flight, could not have fully appreciated that his meticulous test flights would directly influence a fighter that would help win the war. But history is forged by such moments, when chance and preparation brilliantly intersect, when fortune unequivocally favors those ready to exploit it, when a single piece of intelligence arrives at exactly the right time to influence events far beyond its apparent significance. The Akutan Zero was such a moment, and the F6F Hellcat was its magnificent legacy. One captured aircraft, one skilled test pilot, one pivotal moment in time when intelligence, design, and tactical doctrine converged to create a weapon system that achieved an astonishing 19-to-1 kill ratio and swept Japanese aviation from Pacific skies. The transformation of American naval aviation from underdog to dominant force happened through the brilliant convergence of industrial capacity, engineering excellence, skilled pilots, and crucial intelligence. The Akutan Zero revealed that the seemingly invincible Japanese fighter had exploitable weaknesses. The F6F Hellcat was designed and employed to exploit those weaknesses ruthlessly. When American pilots took F6F Hellcats into combat, they carried with them not just superior technology, but superior knowledge. They knew the Zero's weaknesses because Eddie Sanders had discovered them. They knew how to exploit those weaknesses because tactical doctrine had been brilliantly rewritten based on Sanders' test flights. They knew they could win because the mystique of Japanese invincibility had been utterly shattered by hard data from the captured aircraft. The 19-to-1 kill ratio was the inevitable, glorious result, a powerful testament to what can be achieved when chance provides opportunity and skill transforms that opportunity into overwhelming advantage. The story of how one test pilot's captured Zero transformed the F6F Hellcat into a 19-1 killing machine demonstrates that warfare is decided not just by courage and firepower, but by intelligence, adaptation, and the ability to learn from the enemy. The F6F Hellcat and the Akutan Zero together wrote a profound chapter in aviation history that continues to resonate 8 decades later. It is lasting proof that sometimes the greatest victories come not through destruction, but through understanding.